Welcome, everybody, to NFL Mock Draft 4.0. The Combine, of course, is now in the books. Free agency will be starting off within the next 24 hours as of the time I'm recording this. And today's mock draft will be 3 rounds with trades and, of course, predictive. So it's what I think is going to happen rather than necessarily what I would do if all of these teams were ran by me. Of course, free agency is going to change a lot of things. It's going to change roster needs and whatnot. We may see some picks and players traded. So this mock draft, or at least certain picks of it, might not age particularly well over the next week. But nonetheless, it'll be interesting to see how everything unfolds. And without further ado, let's not waste any time. Let's get started. Keep in mind here, the picks in the green are the picks that are involved in trades. And we'll start at number 1 with the Chicago Bears, picking, obviously, Caleb Williams. This pick has not changed since the start of the pre-draft process, and it will not change until we get to the draft. Obviously, the Justin Fields trade market is kind of fascinating because the Bears clearly have not gotten what they expected, but obviously that will not deter them from picking Caleb Williams. Pick 2 is a little bit more interesting because there's been a lot of buzz about Jayden Daniels going here. And I could see it happening. I could also see Washington moving back a spot or 2 for Jayden Daniels and letting, say, New England go up and get Drake May. But I refuse to believe that's going to happen for now. I personally believe that Drake May is comfortably the second best quarterback prospect in this draft. And for me, I think he's closer to Caleb Williams as a prospect than Jayden Daniels. I think this is the no-brainer move for Washington, the only move that they should make, and I ultimately think they will do so. Number 3, we have a trade. Now, obviously, QB is a position of need for New England. They traded away Mac Jones this morning to Jacksonville. Regardless if Mac was on the roster or not, quarterback is a need for this team. However, I could see them moving back. Say they don't fall in love with Jayden Daniels. They want to build out the rest of the roster, specifically the offense, because it is certainly not catered to be a good offense for a young quarterback. So I had the Giants moving up from 6 to 3. I have all of the trades listed in the description if you want to look at the compensation. But I'm going to have the Giants giving up, obviously, the 6th pick, their 2nd rounder this year, their 2nd rounder next year, their 4th rounder this year, and their 4th rounder next year. And they'll be getting this pick along with a 7th from New England. So the Giants don't have to give up any additional first rounders in order to go up and get their quarterback, Jayden Daniels. They did just give Danny Dimes the big extension, but I think given this opportunity, the Giants would absolutely be interested in upgrading the quarterback position, and without having to give up a first rounder other than obviously number 6 overall, I think it's something that they would have to consider. Number 4 with the Cardinals, pretty easy pick. Marvin Harrison Jr. falls, so Arizona's going to scoop him up. Number 5, Rome Odunze out of Washington to the Chargers. This is an interesting one because a lot of people, myself included, feel that Malik Nabers is the second best receiver in this draft. But I think teams are really going to like Odunze, especially the Los Angeles Chargers. Odunze is probably the best blocker of the group, and I think Jim Harbaugh wants to be able to have an offense that can run the ball, ground and pound, which I think would make Joe Alt certainly an option here. But I think Odunze kind of fits what the Chargers are looking for, the type of character that they are looking to bring onto their football team, and obviously in terms of talent, Odunze's got that. So New England here at 6, I think the Patriots might be the biggest winners here at the first round. They move down 3 spots, they get 2 seconds, they get 2 fourths, and they still end up with Malik Nabers, who you could argue could be in play with the 3rd pick. This is a grand slam move for New England, getting a number 1 wideout for whoever their long-term quarterback is going to be. Hopefully, for their sake, they find one within the next couple of years. But this would be a fantastic turn of events for New England. At 7, I've got the Titans picking Joe Alt out of Notre Dame. Have to imagine this would be one of the offensive tackles or receivers, depending on who falls for the Titans. The 3 receivers are all gone, but Joe Alt is still here, so I think this is a pretty easy pick for them. Run the card up to the podium. And then the Falcons at 8. I think if the board plays out like this, they're going to look for the top defensive player available, and there's a few different routes they could go with. I think in my last mock draft, I had them picking Byron Murphy out of Texas. I think that's in play. Corners in play. But I've got them going with Dallas Turner, the edge rusher out of Alabama. He tested really well at the Combine, super explosive and dynamic player. The Falcons have been missing that true alpha pass rusher for a long time, and now they can finally potentially get that with Dallas Turner, who ends up being the first defensive player drafted. With the 9th pick, I had the Bears getting Byron Murphy II, the defensive tackle out of Texas. And this is an interesting pick because the Bears have really addressed their defensive line. Last year, they added Zach Pickens out of South Carolina and Gervin Dexter out of Florida, both of whom showed some solid flashes. But I think given the talent and upside level that Byron Murphy has, it would be hard for them to pass this up and get another big body in the middle of that defensive line. I think Byron Murphy's got legit game-wrecking upside, and as a fan of the team in the division with the Bears, I can't say I'd be overly pleased about this. At number 10, we've got another trade. The Las Vegas Raiders are moving up for their quarterback, jumping the Vikings and the Broncos for J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan. The Jets are going to move back 3 spots. They're going to add the Raiders' 3rd rounder and a 2025 5th for this selection and a 7th. The Jets player who they want probably is not going to go in the top 10 or really anywhere near 10, presumably, so they figure they can move down a little bit and still get the guy they want. As for the Raiders, they get their quarterback of the future here with J.J. McCarthy, somebody who's got the physical tools and the upside. I'm curious to see what the Raiders do otherwise at quarterback because I think they've got to add a veteran somehow to help train McCarthy, compete with him for the starting job. I don't think Aiden O'Connell can be this team's starting quarterback going into the year. That would be NFL team running malpractice. So I think adding a vet and adding a guy like J.J. McCarthy could be a very viable route for the Raiders to go with. So Minnesota very well could be looking at McCarthy at 11. They could be looking at one of the other quarterbacks as well. But I have them not going with a QB here, instead picking Jared Verse, the edge rusher out of Florida State. Whether Danielle Hunter is back or not, Minnesota's going to need some more guys going after the quarterback. Jared Verse tested really well. He's been a very productive player at Florida State the last couple of years. I think this would be a strong pick. Number 12, the Broncos pick Bo Nix, quarterback out of Oregon. I've always been under the belief that we're not going to have more than 4 quarterbacks go in the first round. But I think with the fit here of Bo Nix in Denver, it would be a lot for them to pass up. Obviously, Russell Wilson is gone. We knew that was going to happen. They could look at a veteran themselves, but I think especially with J.J. McCarthy off the board, I think this is the type of player that Sean Payton would really like to develop and lead his offense. And even if you don't think Bo Nix is a top-of-the-line quarterback prospect, it only takes one team to fall in love with him, and I think that very well could be the Denver Broncos. The Jets at 13 move back a little bit, and they select Troy Fautanu, the offensive tackle out of Washington. This is probably the earliest I've ever seen Fautanu go in a mock draft, and here he ends up as the 2nd tackle off the board after Joe Alt. A lot of people are going to be surprised by this, but I think there's a ton of positive buzz his way, and I think his name is going to rise and rise and rise as we get closer to the draft. He tested very well at the Combine. Pretty much every draft analyst out there has him as one of their guys who they really like, and that leads me to suggest that teams are going to really like him as well, and the overall media perception around Fautanu has been lower than it should be. And that he does belong in the conversation to be one of the first 2 or 3 offensive tackles off the board. And best of all, the Jets had a few additional picks out of it. At 14, I've got the Saints going with Brock Bowers, tight end out of Georgia. At the beginning of the pre-draft process, I had Bowers going regularly into the 5 to 7 range. But I actually think he's going to go more in this range. And it's not necessarily indicative of the player that Brock Bowers is, because he probably is one of the 5 best prospects in this draft. But this class is loaded at the top with players of high positional value. A ton of great receivers, a ton of great offensive tackles, multiple good pass rushers, and obviously plenty of quarterbacks. I think that's going to lead to someone like Bowers slipping a little bit, and in a normal year, he probably does end up as a top 10 pick, but with this class being so good at premium positions at the top, he's going to sink a little bit. Who else but a team like the New Orleans Saints, who's always trying to keep their contention window opening, not focusing on positional value, rather going for the best player on the board. And I think adding a pass catcher absolutely could be in the realm of possibility for New Orleans. Michael Thomas is gone. Their receiving core is a little bit shaky. Obviously, Chris Olave is really good. Rashid Shaheed is a very fun player. But other than that, they don't really have many surefire targets, and I think adding Bowers here makes a lot of sense for them. The Colts at 15 go with Quinion Mitchell, the corner out of Toledo. I think we're going to see a run on corners here, and he ends up being the first one off the board. Mitchell has passed every pre-draft test with flying colors, great at the Senior Bowl, great at the Combine. He's a small school guy, but he has been fantastic for Toledo, and I think he has all the makings of a great NFL corner. We've got another trade here at 16. With the top corner off the board, the Steelers are going to move up to ensure they get their guy, moving up 4 spots with Seattle. The Seahawks are going to get, obviously, pick 20, along with the Steelers' 3rd rounder and the Steelers' 6th rounder, while Pittsburgh adds an additional 5 in the deal. And the Steelers are going to get Terrion Arnold out of Alabama. This is a playmaker, knows how to find the football. He's really improved over his career at Alabama, and I think he'd be a nice fit on this defense. I think him and Joey Porter Jr. would be a really fun duo going forward. It's no secret that the Jacksonville Jaguars are missing that alpha type of receiver, and I think Brian Thomas Jr. comes with that upside, a big play threat down the field. Thomas has great size, great physicality, another guy who tested super well at the Combine, pretty much ensuring that he ends up going here in the 1st round, and I think this fit in Jacksonville would be a really fun one. Amarius Mims, the tackle out of Georgia, goes here at pick 18 to the Bengals. So he ends up being the 3rd offensive tackle off the board, over Olu Fashanu, over Talise Fuaga. And you're probably wondering, why is this the case? Especially considering in my last mock draft, I had Mims going in the 2nd round. I recognized the upside with him, but I feel like teams generally look to hit singles and doubles with their offensive linemen. Make sure you're getting somebody who's going to be a solid starter rather than looking to necessarily swing for the fences and go for the upside pick with Mims. However, I think Mims is a little bit more than that. Just because he hasn't played a ton of football doesn't mean that he's raw. He's not raw. He just has a smaller sample size than a lot of these other guys. And because of that, I think a team's going to want to take a swing on him earlier than people think. Why not the Bengals, who are going to be letting Jonah Williams go? They're going to need a new right tackle. And Amarius Mims is going to be ready to play. He's been a really good player at Georgia. Again, it's just been consistently staying on the field. The Rams here at 19 go with Olu Fashanu. His slide comes to an end. Fashanu's a good player, but I feel like he had not as good of a year as people think. And I think we could see guys like Troy Fautanu and Amarius Mims ultimately go ahead of him. And if you start to hear rumors about that being the case leading up to draft time, I think those rumors are going to be true, clearly, rather than smoke. I think those guys as prospects are at the level that Olu Fashanu is. Nonetheless, this would be a really strong pick. The Rams could use some more talent at tackle, and I think Fashanu here at 19 would absolutely be fair value. At 20, Seattle moves down a little bit. They get the guy I would have given them anyway. Jackson Powers Johnson, the center out of Oregon, another guy who's passed every pre-draft test with flying colors, dominated at the Senior Bowl, great week at the Combine. He can play center and guard, 2 spots that Seattle's going to need. I think he most likely slides in at center, and he's going to be one of the better ones in the league right away. At 21, we've got another trade. In my last mock, I had the Niners move up to pick 17 to get Talise Fuaga, and I still had them trading up to Fuaga, but they'll be able to wait a little bit later with the rise of Troy Fautanu and Amarius Mims. So San Francisco, of course, is moving up with the Miami Dolphins. Miami will get pick 31 along with both of the Niners' 3rd rounders, 94 and 98. The Niners, meanwhile, obviously get this pick along with a 5th and a future 7th. So the Niners are giving up quite a bit to move up here, but I think for a talent of Talise Fuaga, it's absolutely worth it. Somebody who you could argue is not the 5th best tackle in this class. A lot of people think he's in the top 3, maybe even higher than that. But with the rise of Fautanu and Mims, Fuaga ultimately slips a little bit, and the Niners will take advantage. The Eagles at 22 get Cooper DeJean, cornerback out of Iowa. This is somebody who can line up pretty much anywhere in the secondary, and the Eagles are going to have plenty of holes in the secondary next year and going forward, being that it's kind of an older unit. But I think Cooper DeJean will certainly be able to survive at corner, whether it's inside or outside. The Eagles cut Avonte Maddox recently. Their 2 outside corners are both getting older with Slay and Bradbury. So I think this pick would make a lot of sense for them. ZhanNewton out of Illinois goes to the Texans. This would be an awesome fit of team and player. Him in that defense would be nasty. And then Graham Barton out of Duke goes to the Cowboys. Dallas, we know, values offensive line highly. They are not afraid to take the big boys in the first round. Barton can play just about any position you need him to. So whether the Cowboys want to have him at tackle to be the Tyron Smith replacement, or maybe have him kick inside to guard and move Tyler Smith over to tackle, or even center, Graham Barton can play just about any spot you need him to, and I think that versatility is going to be really enticing for a team like Dallas towards the end of the first round. Green Bay here at pick 25 gets J.C. Latham, the offensive tackle out of Alabama. I don't think tackle is a pressing need per se for the Packers, even with David Bakhtiari potentially out the door. I think Rasheed Walker's a good player. Obviously, Zach Tom is great, and he can play just about anywhere on the offensive line. But I think the value here with J.C. Latham might be a little bit too much to pass up, especially considering the fact that the Packers have so many positionably flexible offensive linemen. The Packers have really valued versatility on the line, and because of that, they can play multiple guys in multiple different spots. And J.C. Latham is going to be the next up because I think he can play tackle as well as guard. I think you obviously should look to try him at tackle first, but if it doesn't work out, you can always look to kick him inside. And I think this pick would make a lot of sense for Green Bay. Again, as a fan of a rival team, I can't say I'd really like it all that much. At 26, we've got another trade. The Washington Commanders are jumping back into the first round, giving the Buccaneers pick 36, along with a 4th and a 6th, while Washington gets a 7th, along with obviously this pick, and they select Laiatu Latu, the edge rusher out of UCLA. Montez Sweat, of course, is gone. Chase Young is gone. I think they could look to add another presence on the edge. And why not go with Latu, one of the most polished defensive players in this draft class? I think he's going to be able to produce for them right away. Obviously, they've got Adam Peters coming over from San Francisco and Dan Quinn coming over from Dallas. Those two teams have really built the pass rush and have built the front seven up. And because of that, I think Washington is really going to focus on the front seven this offseason, and they start by adding Latu. At 27, the Cardinals go with Chop Robinson, the edge rusher out of Penn State. Tested very well at the Combine. Production was a little bit spotty at times throughout the year, but I think with the physical upside, he very well could still go in the first round, and I think here in Arizona would be a pretty good fit. The Cardinals need some more pass rushing juice, and he gives them that. Adonai Mitchell out of Texas goes to the Buffalo Bills here at 28. Mitchell's certainly a polarizing player, but I think the upside is absolutely there. Big-bodied, physical receiver. I think he's a better route runner than people realize, and obviously he tested well at the Combine. The Bills need somebody who can stretch the field with Gabe Davis gone, and ideally, Mitchell ends up being more of a complete receiver than what Gabe Davis was. The Lions at 29 get aidMcKinstry, corner out of Alabama. I feel like Kool-Aid has quietly become one of the more underrated players in the draft class. Yes, the launch speed and the overall athleticism isn't necessarily elite, but this is somebody with great instincts. He's been a very productive 3-year starter at the University of Alabama. He did run into the foot issue at the Combine. I think he's still going to be able to go for his pro day, so that leads me to believe that the foot injury is not going to be that big of a concern long term. If it is, that certainly could mess with his draft stock. But if the foot ends up not being a problem, I think he's a first-round player. And obviously, it's no secret the Lions need help in the back end. I think they're going to be very aggressive, adding a big-time corner, whether that's L'Jarius Sneed or Greg Newsome for the trade market, or somebody in free agency like a Kendall Fuller. I think any of those options for the Lions would make a lot of sense. But regardless, if Detroit adds a corner in free agency, I think it would be smart to add one here in the draft. And with McKinstry and Nate Wiggins on the board, you can't really go wrong. But I think McKinstry gives the Lions more of what they're looking for, and I think this would be an outstanding fit. Nate Wiggins' slide comes to an end. He goes to the Ravens here at pick 30. Wiggins might have the most pure talent of any corner in this draft. Size, length, speed, ball skills, he's got it. But he's got this slim frame, and I think that could be an issue for some teams. Could lack of physicality be an issue at the NFL level? It's not necessarily a competitiveness issue with him, and he does have some nice plays as a run defender. It's more so just, will he be able to hold up at that small of a frame? I wouldn't be surprised if he bulks up, which obviously is going to impact his speed, and he might not necessarily be a 4.29 guy at the next level. But if he's going to be able to match up with the strength of NFL receivers, you could argue he's got the highest ceiling of any corner in the draft. The Dolphins moved down 10 spots. They added multiple top 100 picks out of it. And they get Zach Frazier from West Virginia, another talented interior offensive lineman who can play center and guard. The Dolphins are going to be able to try him out at both spots. And I think the value here is fair at the end of the first round. And then the Chiefs at 32. Xavier Worthy, Mr. 4-2-1, is still on the board. And I think it's going to be hard for Kansas City to pass up that type of speed into this offense. And this would be an amazing fit for Worthy's skill set. A very common pairing of team and player throughout the pre-draft process has been Ladd McConkey to the Carolina Panthers at 33, and for good reason. He'd be an amazing addition to this offense. He's going to be one of the best route runners in the NFL as soon as he gets drafted, and if he does not go in the first round, which is absolutely in play, Carolina would be tickled pink to add him here in the second. Jordan Morgan, tackle out of Arizona to New England. Again, the focus is building the infrastructure for whoever the long-term quarterback is going to be. You got your long-term top receiver. Now you get a nice addition for the offensive line. Kingsley Suamataia, the tackle out of BYU, goes to the Cardinals. A little bit raw, but he's got impressive physical upside. And I think here at 35, the Cardinals could look to add their other bookend tackle on the other side of Paris Johnson. The Buccaneers move down from 26 to 36, and they still end up with Peyton Wilson out of NC State. Linebacker is a position that the Buccaneers have valued. I mean, this is the same team who used a top 5 pick on Devin White. Levante David has been successful here for a decade. That duo has been fun, but they're probably not going to be around much longer. I think Devin White probably finds a new home this offseason. Levante David's getting a lot older. They have drafted some intriguing players here at linebacker recently. Servasia Dennis from Pitt, I think, is pretty talented. Britt had a pretty solid season last year. But I think a guy like Peyton Wilson, with his talent, with his upside, and his character, would all make a lot of sense for this Buccaneer defense. Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia goes to the Chargers. Another guy who I feel like is kind of being slept on throughout this pre-draft process. I think Lassiter's a really good player, and the Chargers, could look to add another talented corner opposite of Asante Samuel Jr., and I think Lassiter would be absolutely fair value here early in the second. Tyler Nubin, the safety from Minnesota, another guy who I feel like is kind of being slept on. For me, I think he's pretty comfortably safety 1 in this draft. The Titans are going to add a very talented piece to the back end of the secondary. The Patriots here at 39, they got this pick from the Giants earlier today, and they get Mike Sainristil out of Michigan. Probably the earliest you've seen Sainristil go. He may not be the biggest, very undersized, but this kid is one hell of a football player. You can put him in a variety of different spots. I think ideally probably is the nickel corner. And I think Gerard Mayo is really going to like this guy because he's a great football player. And even if he doesn't necessarily have the physical traits that you look for, the guy can ball. And I think New England's going to look to add as much overall talent as they can. Adrian Cooper, linebacker out of Texas A&M to the Commanders here at 40. I've had Cooper going in the first round pretty often. I think he goes earlier than expected. Here he slides into the second, but I think this would be a really good fit of team and player. Cooper is a do-it-all linebacker who can do just about everything, tested well himself. I think the athletic upside is absolutely there. And as I mentioned in the first round, when Washington traded up for Laiatu Latu, their GM is coming from San Francisco, the same team who employs Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. Having 2 talented off-ball linebackers anchor a defense can really help you out, and adding a guy like Adrian Cooper here in the second round I think would follow suit with how San Francisco has built their defense. The Packers just can't help themselves with these Georgia players as they get Javon Bullard, the safety, out of obviously Georgia. Safety's a big need for the Packers. Bullard can play a variety of different spots in the secondary, and I think they're going to like his versatility. Possibly what they hoped Darnell Savage could have been for them. At 42, we've got a trade. The Rams are going to be moving up 9 spots with Minnesota, giving the Vikings pick 51 and 100 in the third round. The Rams are going to go up and get Darius Robinson, the edge rusher out of Missouri, somebody who's got plenty of positional flexibility. I think he would fit pretty nicely in the Rams' defense. At 43, we've got another trade. The Colts are moving up 3 spots with Atlanta, swapping a 4th rounder for a 6th rounder, and they'll be moving up for Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of Florida State. For me, Coleman's kind of a polarizing player because he's a big guy. Obviously, he didn't run super fast, but he tested really well. Other than that, for the most part at the Combine, he did really well at the Gauntlet Drill. Coleman's a very sort of polarizing player because he's a bigger guy, but I think he has the skill set with the ball in his hands of a smaller receiver. And I think the upside is absolutely there with Keon Coleman, and I think he is kind of the Colts type. They've really prioritized bigger-bodied receivers with, say, Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, and now they get Coleman with both of those guys' future kind of being in question, being that Alec Pierce has been a little disappointing, and Michael Pittman Jr. being, of course, on the franchise tag. Christian Mahogany, guard out of Boston College to the Raiders. They're adding a piece up front for their new quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, and I think the value here would be absolutely fair. T.J. Tampa, corner out of Iowa State to New Orleans. The Saints have some talent in the secondary. I think there is some upside with Alontae Taylor and Isaac Yiadom. Paulson Adebo played quite well last year, but it wouldn't hurt to add another guy, and I think Tampa is a pretty talented player. Ricky Pearsall out of Florida goes to the Falcons. He gives something that they don't really have at wide receiver, and I think he'd be a really fun fit for that offense. Jalen Polk out of Washington goes to the Giants, adding a talented weapon for their new quarterback, Jaden Daniels. The Giants' receiving core obviously is not the best, so I think it would be smart to add another guy. And with the one-on receivers, with Coleman, Pearsall, and Polk all coming off the board, the Browns are going to move up and ensure they get Troy Franklin. They're going to move up 7 spots with the Jaguars. The two teams will swap third-rounders, and Jacksonville will get a fifth-rounder. So the Browns move down in the third and give up a fifth to move up and get Troy Franklin out of Oregon. So this is an interesting pick because the Browns did just trade for Jerry Jeudy yesterday, and I will point out, I made this mock draft before that trade. So I'm not sure if the Browns would be overly aggressive to adding a receiver early now, but if they did, somebody of the archetype of Troy Franklin would be the type of player that the Browns, I think, would look for. Somebody who can stretch the field vertically and give them long speed. Even with the addition of Jeudy, Troy Franklin gives the Browns something that they don't really have at the receiver position. So I don't know if they would be aggressive to move up for a guy like him, but I think in terms of fit, it would still make a lot of sense. In my last mock draft, I had the Bengals move down in the first round and end up with Jatavion Sanders. Here they get him in the second round, which is a big win for Cincinnati. I think Sanders and Amarius Mims would be a pretty good use of their top 2 picks. Tyler Guyton finally off the board here to the Eagles. I think he's a little bit more raw than some of the other tackles at the top of this draft, which is why I think he might slip a little bit further. But the Eagles have a very rich history of developing offensive line, and I think Tyler Guyton very well could be the long-term replacement for Lane Johnson. Cooper Beebe out of Kansas State goes to the Vikings. Beebe hasn't really gotten a lot of top 2 round hype, but I think he's that good. I think Cooper Beebe is one of the most slept-on players in the draft. So the Vikings move down, they add the 100th pick in the draft, and they get a really good player, in my opinion, with Cooper Beebe. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. out of Clemson goes to the Steelers, a team who historically has not been afraid to draft linebacker early. This is the team who traded into the top 10 5 years ago to pick Devin Bush. Obviously, that pick didn't work out. They're hoping Trotter will be able to be a little bit more successful. Trotter doesn't necessarily have the physical attributes and measurements that are really going to pop out, but he's a highly instinctive player, and I think he'd be a nice fit in this defense. Braden Fisk out of Florida State goes to the Dolphins. He had an outstanding showing at the Combine, was great at the Senior Bowl, and he started to get some possible late first-round buzz. I don't think he is of that level as a prospect, but I think here in the 50 range would be absolutely fair value, and he gets to stay in the state of Florida, traveling south to the Dolphins, who had some more juice on the defensive line. Jalen McMillan, the wide receiver out of Washington, goes to the Eagles. They obviously have one of the better wide receiver duos in the league, but they could use a third. McMillan's somebody who can play inside and out. He obviously missed some time with injury last year, but when healthy, he's a really good player. Renardo Green out of Florida State goes to the Jaguars. Versatile defensive back who can play at a number of different spots in the secondary. I think the Jaguars are really going to overhaul the back end this offseason, and adding a guy like Green who can play a few different spots will make a lot of sense. First running back off the board, it's Jonathan Brooks going to the Dallas Cowboys. Tony Pollard probably is gone. Even if the Cowboys do re-sign Pollard, I think adding another back would make a lot of sense because Tony Pollard has shown that he's at his best in a running back by committee. So regardless of his status, I think adding a running back pretty early would make sense for Dallas, and they go with Jonathan Brooks coming off the ACL injury. Dallas Cowboy doctors were the ones who did the surgery, so they should have the inside scoop on what his knee situation is like, and if they're not concerned by it, I could absolutely see them adding him here at the end of the second round. It won't take too much longer for our second running back to come off the board. It's Trey Benson out of Florida State, who for me, as of now, I think would be my top running back in the class. he hasn't really gotten a ton of hype compared to some of these other top backs, but I think Benson is an outstanding player, and the Packers are adding a big-time playmaker to the offense. Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon to the Buccaneers. Tampa Bay's had a lot of recent success with day 2 defensive backs. Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean come to mind. Sean Murphy-Bunting as well has been a solid NFL player. So they're going to go back to the well, adding Kyrie Jackson, whose stock I feel like has gone up over the last couple of months, and he'll add to the back end. Chris Braswell out of Alabama goes to the Houston Texans. Talented edge rusher who adds even more to their pass rush. They already got ZhanNewton earlier. Now they add Braswell, really focusing on building that front unit with some of those guys, in particular Jonathan Grenard, possibly gone as free agents. Kalen Bullock, safety out of USC, goes to the Bills. Buffalo is overhauling a lot of positions on their team, including safety, and they add a talented player here with Bullock. Kieran Amagaje to the Lions. I think he very well could play guard early on. Played tackle at Yale, but I think his versatility is what the Lions are going to like. He very well could be a long-term tackle, as Taylor Decker's not getting any younger, but for now I think he would play one of those guard spots. Roman Wilson, wide receiver out of Michigan to the Baltimore Ravens. He gives them another talented player who can play the outside and inside. Good route runner, solid with the ball in his hands, good blocker. I think his well-roundedness is going to be something the Ravens really like. Cam Hart out of Notre Dame goes to the 49ers. The one question mark on their roster is corner. Travarius Ward's a good player, but other than that, they've got Diamador Lenore, who's pretty solid, but he's also expiring. I'm not sure if they're going to want to pay him after next year. So getting younger with Hart, I think, could make sense. And then Braylon Trice, the edge rusher out of Washington, goes to the Kansas City Chiefs, adding another pass rusher to the group. Trice, a highly productive player, is going to give them another body up front. Now that we're into the third round, we're going to be moving quite a bit faster, but we are starting with a bang. Seattle's going to be moving up 13 spots with Carolina, jumping from 78 to 65, swapping a 4th rounder for a 6th rounder, and the Seahawks are going to pick Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback out of Washington. It seems like Geno Smith is going to be back next year as the starter. Is he the long-term guy, though? Probably not after the next couple of years. So they add a talented player in Penix who they can develop. Obviously, he's going to be familiar with the system already with his offensive coordinator at Washington, Ryan Grubb, now being the offensive coordinator of the Seahawks. So I think the fit here would be pretty seamless. Devondre Sweat, defensive tackle out of Texas, goes to the Cardinals. They had a big body up the middle as their nose tackle, getting another good piece for the defensive line. Dominic Pooney out of Kansas goes to the Commanders. Versatile offensive lineman, can play a few different spots for them. Marshawn Kneeland, edge rusher out of Western Michigan to the Patriots, getting themselves a pass rusher to add to the defense. At pick 69, nice. Chris Jenkins, defensive lineman out of Michigan, goes to the Chargers. Obviously, he is familiar with the previous coach, Jim Harbaugh, and Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator. So, similarly with the Penix pick, he'll be a seamless fit into that unit. Jackrabbit Taylor Jemerson out of Texas Tech. The safety goes to the Giants. Xavier McKinney seems like he's probably not going to be back, so they're going to add his replacement. Ennis Rakestraw Jr. out of Missouri goes to the Cardinals. Pick 71 might seem low. He's gotten some first-round buzz, but I think he goes lower than expected. His relative athletic score was pretty low for what we would have hoped for at the Combine, and the only successful corner drafted over the last decade whose RAS score was as low as his was Xavier Howard, who has all world ball skills. So unless Rakestraw is some elite ball skill type of player, his athleticism could be an issue at the next level, but he's a talented physical player, and because of that, I still think he gets drafted in the top 100 for sure, and the Cardinals are going to scoop him up. Xavier Legette out of South Carolina goes to the Jets. He's an interesting guy because he's a big physical receiver, but he ran super well at the Combine, and I think the upside with him is really high. I could see somebody falling in love with him in, say, the 30s or 40s and him going way earlier than this, but this is how the board plays out. He slips a little bit, and the Jets add a fun piece to the offense. The Lions met with a number of the big-bodied receivers at the Combine, such as Legette, Tez Walker, and others, and I think that's not really a surprise to me. That's the type of archetype of wide receiver the Lions are looking for. They have their vertical field stretcher with Jameson Williams. You have your slot guy with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who obviously can play on the outside as well. He can do just about everything. You have your all-world tight end in Sam Laporta, but now you add your big physical receiver here with Tez Walker, who's been a little disappointing throughout the pre-draft process, but he's a talented player, and I think he fits what the Lions are looking for. Jaden Hicks out of Washington State goes to the Falcons. Versatile player, can play inside the box. I think he gives their defense a fun chess piece. Marshawn Lloyd, running back out of USC to the Chicago Bears, adding possibly their long-term starter here. They've got some solid players already, such as Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson, of course, my guy Deontay Foreman as well. But I'm not sure any of those guys are going to be the long-term 1A running back. And for them, they're hoping that Marshawn Lloyd can be that guy. Chris Abrams-Drain out of Missouri, the other Missouri corner, goes to the Denver Broncos. They could look to add some more help in the secondary at corner, and hopefully for them, he could be the long-term starter alongside Pat Surtain. Mason Smith out of LSU, the defensive lineman, goes to the Jets. I think these LSU defensive tackles, Smith and Mekhi Wingo, are both pretty underrated, and I think they both go in the top 100 picks. And I think Smith here would be a very solid selection for the Jets. Andrew Phillips, corner out of Kentucky, goes to the Panthers. It sounds like they're going to let go of Dante Jackson. Jeremy Chin, their versatile safety, might be gone as well. They need some more guys in the secondary, and Andrew Phillips is a guy who I think can play inside at a high level, possibly has outside flexibility as well. Rook Ororo out of Clemson goes to the Atlanta Falcons. They are not overly young on the defensive line. Calais Campbell is pushing 40. Grady Jarrett's not going to be around forever. And Oro gives them a fun piece to develop there. And then Dwayne Carter out of Duke goes to the Bengals. Polished player, high floor. He gives them another body up front. And I think that'd be a solid pick for them here. Adisa Isaac out of Penn State, the edge rusher, goes to the Seattle Seahawks with their second of 3 third-round picks here. Isaac ultimately slips a little bit, but I think this would be a pretty solid fit. Seattle adds another body to go after the quarterback. Jonah Ellis, edge rusher out of Utah to the Colts. I think he's absolutely better than the 82nd player in the draft. Versatile, can play inside and out, and I think the Colts are going to like his flexibility. The Eagles are going to move up here from 97 to 83, giving the Rams 2 fifth-rounders, and the Eagles will get an additional 6th. They select Junior Colson, the linebacker out of Michigan. Colson's a talented player who, again, very well could go earlier than this, and they jump Seattle, who was targeting a linebacker here. They'll settle for Maris Liafu out of Notre Dame. Still a talented player nonetheless. Bobby Wagner, obviously, is not getting any younger. Jordan Brooks as well is a free agent. So I think Seattle could look to add a linebacker here. Javon Solomon out of Troy goes to the Jaguars. Of course, this is the same team that picked Trayvon Walker, number 1 overall, who obviously was raw with athleticism. Solomon's kind of the opposite. He's not necessarily a high ceiling player. The production at Troy over the last couple of years has been ridiculous. I think he had like 16, 17 sacks this year or something crazy. Jalen Wright, the running back out of Tennessee, goes to the Texans. I think adding a running back certainly will be in the cards for them. Devin Singletary was a really pleasant surprise, but he is a free agent. Dameon Pierce is obviously a different type of player, and he was disappointing last year to begin with. So whether they sign somebody or not, I think picking a guy like Jalen Wright here would make a lot of sense for them. Mekhi Wingo out of LSU goes to the Dallas Cowboys. They drafted Mozzie Smith in the first round. I think they still believe in him, but Wingo gives them another body up front. And then the Packers get Brandon Dorlus out of Oregon. Versatile defensive lineman. He's a little bit of the defensive lineman edge tweener. So the Packers are going to have to figure out how they're going to want to use him. But I think his versatility is going to be something that they really like. The Buccaneers get Mason McCormick, guard out of South Dakota State. The Buccaneers have not shied away from drafting smaller school interior offensive linemen. It worked with Ali Marpet. They did it last year with Cody Malk. And now they do it here with McCormick. Christian Haynes, guard out of UConn to the Cardinals. Really good value pick here at the end of the third round. The Cardinals add another potential starter for the offensive line. Johnny Wilson out of Florida State goes to the Packers, another Seminole for Green Bay. Wilson's an intriguing player because he is awfully tall, and I think he's got an intriguing skill set long term. The Packers have a few really good receivers as is, but with somebody of the uniqueness as Johnny Wilson, I could see them looking to take a shot on him. Mohamed Kamara out of Colorado State goes to the Lions. A little bit undersized as an edge rusher, but the talent is absolutely there. Gives Detroit another body going after the quarterback. Patrick Paul out of Houston goes to the Ravens. I don't think Paul is quite as polished as people think. I think that leads him to slipping a little bit, but the Ravens are going to add him here at the end of the third. This would be pretty good value. Malachi Corley goes to the Dolphins. This fit would be unfair. Malachi Corley in the Mike McDaniel offense terrifies me. Javon Foster, the tackle out of Missouri, goes to the Kansas City Chiefs, gets him another piece on the offensive line. And then Christian Boyd, the defensive tackle out of Northern Iowa, goes in the top 100 picks, giving the Browns another piece up front on the defensive line. Now we're on to the compensatory selections, the final 5 picks of the video, as we'll start with the Rams at 97, who get Spencer Rattler, quarterback out of South Carolina. Rattler's gotten some buzz. I think teams are going to like him. The Rams want to get their long-term replacement for Matthew Stafford, who's going to be one of the older quarterbacks in the league going into next year. Not to mention he's got a pretty lengthy injury history, so planning for life after Stafford wouldn't be the worst idea. Tanner Bortolini, offensive lineman out of Wisconsin to the Niners. High upside player, versatile, athletic. I think he could be really good. Austin Booker out of Kansas goes to the Bills. He's inexperienced, but he's got upside. A little disappointing, though, at the Combine, which is ultimately why he falls. Blake Corum, running back out of Michigan to the Minnesota Vikings. Alexander Madison's gone. They add a new, tough, physical runner here with Corum. And then the final pick of the day, another running back. It's Ray Davis out of Kentucky, going to the Washington Commanders. I think him and Brian Robinson's skill sets would feed off of each other pretty well, and that would be a fun duo in the backfield for Washington. So that'll wrap up the video. Let me know what you thought of my picks down below in the comments. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.